Catherine Fiore, EU reporter. Executive Vice President, in the last commission that you were part of, there was a publication on the EU's relations with China, a strategic approach, where you described China as an economic competitor, a strategic partner and a systemic rival. You were very careful not to mention a country or a particular company, but if you observed the debate in the House of Commons yesterday, the debate was very focused on one company, and that was Huawei. So my question to you is, do you consider Huawei to be part of the problem or part of a long-term strategic solution for Europe? Et j'ai une question pour commissaire Breton. Je vais le dire en anglais pour aider les interprètes. Commissioner Breton, can you say what distinguishes the EU's approach from the approach outlined in the UK yesterday? I know it's not your job to follow what's happening in the UK, but it would be interesting to know if you'd observed any differences. And my final question is to the President of the Croatian Regulatory Authority. Do you think that all EU states are ready? Do they have the skills to put in to monitor these security challenges?
Thank you, Sophie.
Oui, Sophie Petitjean pour l'Agence Europe aujourd'hui. Je voudrais faire un follow.
I'd like to follow up on David Carreta's question. Would it be possible for a member state, on the basis of the list of risks and tools that you've established, would it be possible that they decide to exclude a company from part of the network, and another member state decides to exclude them from the whole network? Another member state will actually include them in the network. So you would have a fragmentic approach. Are there any sanctions encompassed in the toolbox? And I would also like a comment on the information we've received that Berlin apparently has information that proves that Huawei is in cahoots with the Chinese authorities. And if I may, a last question, well, actually, it's more of a comment than anything else. If you were to summarize what you're doing, I get the impression, well, you're talking about responsibility, and you say you're inviting operators to use European equipment, and you ask non-Europeans to work from Europe. Is that too simplistic?
Ouais. On va répondre déjà, peut-être. Ouais. On va répondre déjà, comme c'était beaucoup de questions par personne.
Well, that's an... we'll answer now because there were several questions just for one person.
On the first issue of the EU-China communication, where you cite sort of our approach very precisely, that basically sort of we retired the idea of China as a developing country, but so is as a strategic competitor in a number of areas, but also as a strategic partner, for instance, when it comes to climate change. That, as a sort of an overall horizontal assessment, has not changed. When it comes to the specifics, here, when member states have the responsibility for their security, it is for member states to make the risk assessment. What has been very important for us in this work is that the risk assessment is based on objective criteria, so that it can be open and transparent. What are the things that you will have to live up to in order to be a trusted partner, both as a telco operator, but also as a supplier of hardware and software? And the reason why this approach has been developed is exactly sort of the division of labor between member states and Commission as such. And how I have seen this develop sort of firsthand, there also seemed to be a conversion among member states as to how to deal with this. Because if you see the first analysis where sort of the entire value chain of 5G was assessed, you'd see that there is a common understanding of where do we have technical issues that have to be looked at, where do we have more strategic issues. And with the things in the toolbox, I see that there will be a conversion, but that is for member states to assess. And the reason why we ask for this to be done fast is, of course, for us to be able to continue the rollout of 5G, since it's of the essence of growth and some of the solutions that will enable us to serve citizens so much better, and therefore also keeping the pace of member states enabling each other and sharing their experience and their risk assessments.
Peut-être vous me direz poser derrière la question.
Yes, I'd like to answer the question about discussions in the Parliament. Now, it's just normal that issues such as this should be discussed in the member states with their stakeholders. I mean, we're not the ones that are going to have these discussions with them. We're not going to step into their shoes. You have a debate in the British Parliament, for example. Now, of course, when we commissioners are not going to comment on what's happening in the United Kingdom, far be it from us. But one thing I would like to highlight, the UK was a very active partner in the process right through to the end of last year. They helped us identify and flag up the risks, and we all agree that there are risks, and we all agree on what the risks are. And they also worked with us on the solutions. I don't want to go into the details on the solutions now. I mean, that's not my role, and this is all very fresh, very new. We only took a decision in the college this morning. But I would like to clarify, I think, once again. Our British friends and all the member states share the exact same assessment of the risks, including the telecom equipment suppliers who are deemed to be high risk on certain parts of the network. Now, it's true, there might be some free riders. Well, again, let's see what has been done. All member states have agreed that these are the risks that exist. All member states have drawn up solutions to mitigate these risks. Now, everyone has their own specific characteristics. What is interesting in the toolbox, if you look at it closely, and I would urge you to read this carefully, I mean, and then contact my team, Margareta's team, if you want answers to very specific questions, because you've got to understand the toolbox well. Member states can use this toolbox also to cater to their own specific characteristics as time goes by. For example, you might have some member states who say, look, we have certain strategic areas, for example, where we have a lot of research centres or hospitals, defence installations that are very confidential. The member states then can say, well, in these particular areas, I'm going to apply maximum security, so zero risk, no transition at all. And there are others who might say, well, I rather like this equipment supplier. We've had a discussion with the supplier to see whether the supplier can tackle the problems over time. And if they cannot do so, then I can turn to other suppliers to resolve my problems. But there's one thing I am absolutely convinced by. I think the work that we have done give us a joint commitment to go in a certain direction, in the 5G direction. And one thing I'd like to emphasize, and this is absolutely essential, and this is something where I've been working with Margareta, especially in things such as artificial intelligence. But one thing I'm convinced by is that increasingly companies, boards of governors are going to be responsible. They are the ones that are going to have to manage all of this. Now, in the light of the GDPR, they are going to have to shoulder their responsibilities. This is a radical change now. So these risks are now well known, they've been well identified, and it's up to all stakeholders along the whole chain to make sure that they tackle these risks. And if they don't do so, I think it'll be made quite clear to them that they have to shoulder the responsibility. This is why also we believe that the approach that we have taken is very clear. It's been built up very clearly. And if you like, it's a matrix which can be used on which to build our new future society.
Sur la Chine, j'ai aucune.
On China and what came out from the Handelsblatt in Germany, I don't have any comments. I'm not aware of this. But in any case, we didn't have any input from them at all. No, nothing.
Merci beaucoup. I think we'll take two last final questions because then we got to leave it there and then we have to take a briefing afterwards. James, do you still want to ask your question? Okay, and then maybe you can have a question and then we leave it there.
Yes. Thank you, James. Thank you, Johannes. James Cantor, EU Scream. Commissioner Breton, you talked about the UK reaching the exact same assessment as European authorities. Does that translate into the UK having the exact same policies when it comes to the toolbox as the EU? And in light of that, would you say there is convergence or divergence here when it comes to the EU and the UK on 5G, Huawei, and telecoms?
I'm Alexander Fanta with netzpolitik.org. Commissioner Vestager, I have a question for you concerning trade defense instruments. So the toolbox mentions trade defense instruments, anti-dumping, anti-illegal subsidies measures. And I was wondering, as it is notoriously difficult to determine if, for instance, a Chinese company gets illegal subsidies from to any company, there was a couple of years back, there was a competition with this investigation by the European Commission into Huawei and ZTE, which I understand didn't really lead to any solid conclusions. But do you think that with the current instruments the European Commission has, it is even able to find out about such illegal subsidies? And are you looking at Huawei and ZTE in any way at the moment, currently, on this issue?
Yes.
So there was a question about capacities of countries to implement the toolbox and to deal with all these risks and threats. Well, I'm coming from a relatively small country, and yes, sometimes we don't have enough capacities. But this whole process about having toolbox showed in a way what can we do when we really rely on each other. So I guess not every member state can have all the capacities needed for anything. But when we cooperate together, then it really works. So this whole process, knowing it from my colleagues who were directly involved, well, for me personally, it's something which restores trust in the Union. So I think we can continue in that way. But of course, we cannot always have all necessary capacities.
When you look at the UK decision yesterday, of course, as Thierry just said, we are not prior to insights of that decision, but it appears to be based on a methodology that is consistent with the EU toolbox approach. So also here we see that there is a sense of convergence. On the question of anti-dumping measures, we're quite happy with the reform or the changing when it comes to anti-dumping measures, still being compliant with a WTO line of thinking, but being able to do anti-dumping measures much faster than previously. And this is, of course, also why we put this up front, also as a deterrent, to say, well, we are willing to use the tools that we have available. And also from a competition law perspective, we will look at this market to make sure that there are not sort of contractual clauses that locks in telcos in a way that is anti-competitive. So it's to say we take all the tools that we have available in order to make sure that with the risk assessment and the measures that member states will take, that we can have a coherent approach to 5G security so that we can get it started. Because this year it is already appearing in, I think, more than 130 cities. And that sort of shows that if we get this right, then citizens actually quite fast can get the benefits of better services because of the industrial use.
Just two things. On the UK first. As Margareta said, our UK friends have been associated with the two phases of the process. As she said, we are moving forward together in parallel. Now, they can apply whatever they want now, what they wish, but the EU without our British friends, alas, I think, is standing together. We're coordinated. We have this approach now, which for the first time will mean we have totally secure networks once risks have been identified in the context of 5G. The firms will enjoy the security that arises. Now, the UK has a lot of business with us, and I couldn't imagine that they'd not want a system which would be compatible, completely compatible with us when it comes to data security. It makes perfect sense. I'm quite well acquainted with some of these subjects. Data needs to be secure. And if it wasn't, if security wasn't guaranteed just across the border, then firms would vote with their feet. So I think we will have a good neighbourly policy, neighbourhood policy. We're not working in business here in the Commission as such. But we're not going to, as I say, pick on anybody. We're not ostracising firms. We will have rules, objective rules, which will apply to segments. And there are operators will have multifocal business. They'll work inside and they'll work outside the EU. When they're inside, they must respect the rules of the Union. You've mentioned some firms. We're talking about big players who do important things for Europe and its citizens.
Conference. Thank you, Executive Vice President. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Aboulian. I'm aware of your interest. I'm aware you have more questions. There's a technical briefing to follow now immediately on the topic, and the press conference with Commissioner Kyriakides and Lenarčič on the coronavirus and the European response to it is delayed to 2:30. So we have like another half an hour for the technical briefing. Stay, don't leave. Thank you very much.